and welcome back to First Act, a podcast from Koshy's Business Builders. I'm Cess Busby.
And I'm Adam Bubb.
And this podcast is your window into the great minds of Australia's most game-changing business leaders and ideas people.
Otherwise known as Adam Bubb and Cess Busby. Just kidding. Our guests are the types of overachievers who'll make your brain shake with their brilliant ideas and fascinating backstories. First Act is all about the secret ingredients behind mad success. And that's a not-so-subtle hint about today's guest. These conversations dive into the roads travelled, the mistakes made, and lessons learned on the many different journeys of entrepreneurship. Cess, tell us about today's purveyor of good taste.
Clovis Young is the founder and CEO of one of Australia's tastiest fast food success stories, Mad Mex. Clovis grew up in Southern California and he fell in love with the fresh, bold flavours of Baja Mexican cuisine. And after a stint as a Wall Street equities trader, Clovis followed the way of the guac. He sold his home, he moved to Australia and he launched the first Mad Mex fresh Mexican grill in Sydney's Darlinghurst in 2007. It was a move that would disrupt the local fast food movement with a healthier alternative. And now there are more than 70 locations across the nation and across the ditch. And Clovis, we're so excited to have you here today, so thank you for joining us on First Act.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love the intro. That was great. Thank you. It's just wonderful to be here. Thanks.
Well, Clovis, we're very excited to find out your secrets of your Mad Mex journey. But before we get started, our First Act icebreaker is, what is the hottest chili you've ever had and how did you survive it?
I love these icebreakers. I've been enjoying them on your podcast because there's nothing more fun than seeing a successful person who's mastered the universe trying to figure out how to answer the left field question.
It's exactly why we do them.
Unfortunately, this one's quite easy. I signed up to be an ambassador for the Children's Cancer Council, and it's a wonderful charity. And as part of that, they do it's the Dare to Cure Foundation, and they do you can either do a dare like lie in a bed of snakes, or you can eat something terrible like a bug or a witchetty grub, or put your hand in a box of spiders. But I thought maybe I'd try to eat the world's hottest chili. So it was a Carolina Reaper. And it seemed like such a good idea when we were kind of spitballing ideas 6 weeks before the event. And then, the night before, I kind of turned to my wife and said, oh my God, this, I'm going to cry on national television. This is a terrible idea. So it was a Carolina Reaper. It was incredibly hot. My entire body started shaking at about 2/3 of the way through the chili. And it was, probably the size of a kind of a prune or something. And pretty uncomfortable for 30 minutes and then pretty unwell for kind of 24 hours.
My goodness. So what were you doing to remedy it? Like, did you have to have only ice in your mouth for a while?
Yeah, just gargle milk for the next month.
Yeah, well, I was on the way to the event and I swung past a convenience store and I picked up an avocado. I picked up a tub of yogurt. I had a bottle of milk. I wasn't really upset. We eat a lot of chilies, but I've never really come across chilies that I couldn't handle. But I also hadn't kind of entered the arena of, the kind of extreme heat eaters. So I had a pretty good mix of everything and I tried almost everything. The milk, I think milk's probably the go if you're really in a pinch. That was my takeaway. What's
that TV show where they challenge people to go through and eat all the chilies?
I don't know. I immediately thought of Fear Factor or something like that. Or I don't know. I don't know what you're thinking.
It's funny though because that everyone's really gung-ho to begin it and they think that they can get through them all and then by the end they're sweating bullets.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I watched a couple of videos of, kind of your frat boys in the American universities being all tough and immediately, they're crying on the sofa and I was thinking, gosh, that could very well be me.
So Clovis, can you take us back to where it all began, your kind of first memories of Mexican food growing up in Southern California?
Yeah, so my father grew up in San Diego and I grew up in Berkeley, so a couple hours north up in the San Francisco area. But most of our holidays were spent down in San Diego. So, call it 5 or 6 years old, we would go down to La Jolla Shores and we'd rent a boogie board for $3 and my parents would get rid of me for the whole day because I'd be in the water nonstop for 5 hours. And the thing about being in the water for 5 hours is you come out kind of ravenous. So we used to go to a place called Roberto's La Posta, and it was a little kind of a shack in the middle of a parking lot in front of a drugstore. So by modern standards, it was pretty simple setup. And we buy these carne asada burritos, which is a grilled steak burrito with guacamole, and literally mind blown. So even we're talking kind of 1980 timeframe. Even around then, it was hard to get that kind of food in San Francisco area, or certainly in Berkeley, where we were. So that was kind of always something we really looked forward to on those holidays. And yeah, just that kind of nothing else kind of in that early childhood formative period ever kind of stood out as much as the kind of the perfection of this burrito that would just kind of nail every element. And typically after eating, a 1 pound or a 500-gram steak burrito as a 6-year-old, you'd pass out for 4 hours. But it was kind of the pinnacle of eating as a kid.
So after you've kind of found this burrito that I kind of imagine has this like golden glow around it, this halo, you're like, oh, it's been sent from the gods. Did you come from a family where entrepreneurialism was in your family, or was that something that you found as an adult as you kind of moved towards the calling of burritos?
Yeah, no, my background is quite. My parents had quite a very different look at their careers. They were both writers and poets. My father, got a PhD in English and taught some university, and my father ran a publishing company, publishing poetry. My mother did a bunch of anthologies of women's poetry in the late 70s, early 80s. To my memory, neither of them ever went to work or had a regular 9-to-5 job. And that was kind of straight through for my whole childhood. So they had very little interest or valued kind of commercial success very low, and valued their creative or artistic expression was the kind of the pinnacle of what you set out to achieve as a human being. So the idea that somehow I ended up kind of going down a more commercial route, working on Wall Street for a period of time, and then moving from Wall Street to the Mexican restaurant business couldn't have been any farther from the tree.
Yeah, do you think it is often it's a case that kids kind of react to what their parents do and want to do the opposite? Do you think there was a little bit of that? Because although there was the academic side, like you went and you did a BA in history, but then you went to business school. So was that kind of some of the motivation behind those education choices?
Yeah, it wasn't really a reaction against it, I don't think. It was more just to kind of follow your interests. My parents never once said to me, we think you should go study this or do this, or they were kind of the borderline hippie in their kind of laissez-faire approach to child rearing. So it was really just kind of follow your nose. And I kind of ended up here through curiosity, I guess.
And that curiosity, that kind of took you down that, back to that memory of the steak burrito that we're talking about. We hear you almost opened a Mexican restaurant in Boston in the mid-90s, but instead your career kind of went into Wall Street. Do you regret that? Was it the right call? What happened there?
Yeah, I might even go back a step, because in university and high school, I was really obsessed with skiing and ski racing, and I was fairly successful as an alpine skier. And I think leaving university without a kind of clear direction, you kind of have a bit of a panic attack around, you've kind of achieved some level of success, and you think of yourself as somewhat successful, and then you realize you couldn't be any closer to the bottom of the ladder in terms of, what's next. I brought that passion for Mexican food from childhood in California through to moving to Massachusetts, kind of as an early teenager. And I was always kind of obsessed with Mexican food. When Taco Bell opened up in Maine, I was in the car park at 4 a.m. and I was the first guy to get a taco. So I have had a kind of a taco fetish for multiple decades. Yes, I went to work for a company called Fidelity. I saw somebody do something interesting, and I wanted to do Mexican food. And it was probably one of the few times when I had enough self-awareness to realize that I had the passion, but I actually didn't have the skills. And I think if I had tried to do that business in Boston at 21 years old, I probably would have stuffed it up because it would have just been a bit outside of my. There was too many things I didn't know how to do. So I postponed it and kind of backed away from it.
Let's jump forward then to your move to Australia in 2006. So you and your wife, Angela, were living in Florida. What made you think, actually, let's go to Australia? Australia looks like a great land of opportunity for business and life.
Yeah, so I ended up back in getting an MBA. And the surprise thing with an MBA in Pennsylvania was that I fell in love with business. I thought I'd end up back in Wall Street. And I realized then with the business degree that business is quite varied, and part of the fun of business is the variation. I ended up helping a friend start a business in Florida for a couple of years. And when that kind of project ran its course, I was sitting there wondering what to do next. And it kept coming back to me, this idea about the first burrito, the Mexican restaurant possibility in Boston. And, how many years you have to listen to the voice in the back of your head before you say, I need to put this to rest somehow. So we started thinking about the Mexican food, and it just happened that we went to visit my now ex-wife's family in Sydney. And as part of that trip, I made a point of going and visiting every Mexican restaurant that I could find, from the eastern suburbs to North Sydney to kind of the Manly area. And what was really clear was that what we kind of thought of as Mexican, the burritos, the tacos, the quick casual dining, fast casual kind of concepts didn't exist, right? There were Montezuma's and those kind of restaurants where you could take your whole family and get a big plate of food, but there was nothing that kind of matched our vision for what Mexican should be. So we sold 2 houses, we sold 3 cars, we put the dog on a plane, put the dog into quarantine for 30 or 90 days, and moved to Australia, really with this idea that we were going to open a Mexican restaurant, and also kind of praying that we'd figure out how to make that work.
So business owners often have these great stories of an aha moment when they came up with their big idea, or where you're like, okay, right, we know this is going to be, this is something I have to do. What was the Mad Mex aha moment for you? Was it when you had landed in Australia, or was it before you left?
Yeah, I think one of my good friends, who's a fellow entrepreneur, loves this idea that you've got to follow the energy. If something is energizing and it gets you excited, there's something in that, right? So when we kind of did the scouting and we looked around Sydney and went back and thought about it and kind of contemplated options, there was just so much energy and excitement behind this idea, and it was risky and it was scary, and you could argue that it was incredibly dumb. Who moves to a foreign country where you've visited for 10 days to open a restaurant, which is an industry you're not proficient in? It doesn't meet the threshold for your average college, kind of advisor's recommendation for what to do next in your career. So it was all those things, exciting and scary. I think when I first felt like we'd kind of cracked it was, it sounds kind of simple now, but we opened up the restaurant in Darlinghurst. We finally broke $5,000 in sales in a single day. It was around the time when, guys like lead singer for Wolf Mother were coming in, and Russell Crowe would pop in sometimes. And you kind of, but hitting that $5,000 number made us think, not only are we getting a bit of kind of popular attention, but there might actually be a revenue model that makes this thing work. Because for the first, 6, 12, 18 months, I think we probably, burned through a pile of cash just trying to get to the point where we could figure out what we were doing.
So, you've done that MBA, you've got the knowledge, but not necessarily the practical experience. So, and as you said, you'd never run a hospitality business before. So what were the kind of business blind spots that you encountered?
I did approach everything with kind of a blank slate, which is to say I need to figure out how this works and that works in each piece. And I kind of broke it down in my mind that there were, kind of 10 or 20 modules that had to plug in together to make the machine work. So that's kind of the way my brain naturally works. And I kind of identified, we have to figure out how to do produce. We have to figure out how to do store design. All these components have to come together. That said, made just incredible mistakes not having more experience. We ran labor costs around 50%, and traditionally in a business like ours, you need your labor to be roughly 30%. So we were winning customers, and we were very happy with how the business kind of was performing from a PR and from a customer acquisition, but we really didn't know how to run a business, a food business. We knew how to make great product and how to make customers happy. And it wasn't really until I brought in my first kind of experienced food operations guy to help run the business that he said, Jesus, you love the product. I've never seen people more excited to walk into a restaurant. I've never seen people drag their friends in by their hands and say, you got to try this. But so all that's great, but you can't have 9 people. You got to have 7 people, and you got to get rosters right. So I think, the fine tuning, this business it's a tough, competitive, narrow margin business, and you really need to think about how you set it up to kind of get the right profitability and also then to deliver hopefully a great customer experience and a great product. But you really have to work pretty hard to make sure that the machine is designed to kind of break even and make some money, because there's not a fat profit margin to make mistakes with.
A lot of that means you as the entrepreneur kind of going, it's not just on me, it's about all of those people who have kind of knowledge in areas that I don't have, and building that network and having the right people around you to be able to kind of fill those gaps of knowledge, right? Like to be able to go, okay, I'm going to make mistakes here, but how do I recover from them with the right people, with the right advice?
Yeah, I think that is true. By my nature, I'm a bit of a control freak, or someone that really wants to understand how every little piece of it works. So I definitely dove into things and I used people's advice and learning, and I pulled a lot of information out of those kind of people. But I think what we also did was we kind of understood that you got to grow the brand, you got to grow the revenue, you got to grow the reputation. And there are certain things we know we can fix later. We know we can get the cost of goods down. We can find better ways to produce the product at scale once we get to 3 stores or 5 stores, and we just have to wear that kind of startup pain. And that was probably where the MBA kind of helped. We didn't go into the first store saying, we have to design a store that's going to have some substandard product because of our small scale. We went in saying, we're going to get the product perfect, and we will figure out over time how to make this thing profitable. So we didn't make any money for 3 or 4 years. And any money we did make, we put into building another store.
We'll be back with more from Mad Mex co-founder Clovis Young after this short break. And we're back with Clovis from Mad Mex. So you and Angela ran the business together. What was it like to run such a rapidly growing business with someone who was not just your business partner, but your life partner at the time?
It was chaotic. We threw in another curveball. We had our first child 2 days before we opened the first restaurant. So we did a lot of the pre-work together. We got the concept. We worked with the branding, the agencies, the recipe testing, all the kind of proof of concept pre-opening work together. And then with the first child, that threw a big spanner in the works. So I picked up a lot of the heavy lifting in the first period. I think we did find that people have their natural skills, and I was so 100% involved. And my Angela was a brilliant writer and kind of understood the PR and the marketing side of the business. So she naturally gravitated to a piece that was quite time consuming and outside of the daily operations of running the restaurant. And I really was kind of 100% focused on making sure the machine worked. Did people show up? Was the product good? Was the customer service great? So we did divide it up in that way, mostly successfully, but little tension points along the way.
Tell us more. Tension points.
Well, we can imagine having a child in the midst of all of that, because you're scaling so rapidly, and I think this is something that a lot of business owners can relate to, is that your personal life is affected if so much is happening and you're giving so much to your work, and then you've also got your home life. There's a lot of priorities, like vying for your number one priority, right?
I think in this kind of endeavor, my experience has been that someone has to be 110% committed, and they have to live and breathe every second of it. And in a partnership, then one other person, if there's a second partner, they need to have a very clear mandate on how they can take a load off the other person who's just 100% committed. And we did that pretty well. But one of the pieces of advice we got from Angela's stepfather, who was a very successful man, Jim Fleming, who used to run a chain of supermarkets called Jewel, is he said, the only advice I can give you is put your nose down, bum up, 5 years. If you work your bloody guts out for 5 years, and only then pick your head up and look around, only then will you know if you've been successful. There's nothing between that starting point and some significant amount of blood, sweat, and tears that you're going to have any clue as to whether or not you've made it. And that was really great advice, because we didn't even stop to think. We celebrated along the way, but we didn't stop to think that we'd achieved anything of permanence. It wasn't for at least 5 or 6 years before we kind of got to the point where we said, we think we've made it over that first patch.
That's really interesting, because that concept of success is something that we've spent a lot of time talking with different entrepreneurs about on this podcast, and what you personally view as successful, inside, like when you go home, when you're thinking, okay, what is this? How do I fit? What do I judge as by success to mean? It can be really different from what other people see on the outside,
Yeah, it's certainly, there's different kinds of fun. It certainly wasn't a sip of margarita by the side of the pool kind of fun. Mm-hmm. We both prioritized children. We had then a second child, 18 months later. So if it wasn't work, it was kids, and that was kind of the extent of our universe. And that's okay, right? I don't think you can have it all if you want to do something hard, and that's okay. But my experience, whether it was ski racing or whether it was Mad Max or other ventures, is I've only really ever been successful if I've been able to kind of shut off everything outside of this core focus and get 100% in the zone and just be all in. And when you can do that, then you can really kind of, not many people can find that kind of passion, drive, focus. If you can do that passion, drive, focus for an extended period of time, call it 18 months or 2 or 3 years, that really does give you a massive advantage over people who are kind of doing it as part of a portfolio of things that they're interested in.
Mm. So did you bootstrap the business initially?
Yeah, 100%. I was fortunate enough. I worked for a period of time on Wall Street, and I made a bit of money in that respect. And we did some housing, and so we came with a little bit of seed capital, and we were able to get to about 3 restaurants without bringing any partners in. And then we had a really tough decision, which was there's no way we could do anything else. We're kind of close to tapped out. So the options were you bring in an investor who looks at a P&L that it's not wildly successful, but there's signs of positive news, or we looked at franchising. So that really the franchising came out of you have to choose a path, and franchising solved a couple of issues for us. One was it kind of created capital to expand, and we also found it very difficult to find great managers for these restaurants. So if you get someone who's got some experience, who's got the capital, they've got their home on the line, and they're passionate about the product, it did solve then a human resources kind of question for us. So we found that combination of allowing us to retain kind of the ownership of the business and getting partners who were equally passionate to us was a really good combination.
And I know in more recent years you had Singapore investors for a few years, but now Mad Max is fully Australian owned again. What did you learn from that experience?
Couple learnings. I think for our kinds of businesses that are, brands, local brands, things that have kind of an iconic nature in their community, going from one country to another country is, it's a complete brand new startup, right? Even taking Mad Max from Sydney to Melbourne is like a new country in terms of, there's 5 million people that have never heard of you. Or if you go to Perth, it's really a new country. But you take that kind of framework and you go to Singapore, it's 3 times more kind of new, right? So there isn't this kind of, well, we've been successful here and therefore people are going to love it automatically. You have to do all the same things. You have to create the same magic in that foreign country, to kind of win that new market. We see it a lot with brands coming into Australia, right? And you look around, I'm not picking on anyone, but Joe's The Juice is a brand that popped up about 5 years ago, and they're in the city and they're at the airport. Very successful in America, but I don't know that they ever really captured people's imaginations here. And I think that there's a real learning in terms of how do you launch these things so that you penetrate the zeitgeist, because people are pretty busy. They already have their favorites. And the other part is, partnerships are complicated. This partnership was going really well. And unfortunately, my business partner had a health issue. It came up and rendered him kind of incapacitated or unable to participate in the business. So that was the main road bump we hit.
Just circle back on that, the idea of the zeitgeist. How do you then choose, where to open up, like whether it be a new market like overseas, or whether it's where you're going to do a New South Wales store? Like, what's the reasoning behind that?
We borrowed a concept from a brand that we think's brilliant, Grilled, who do the burgers, and they've got a concept around, you don't build a store or you don't open a store. You kind of plant a store like a tree. You plant a tree in the neighborhood, and then you need to water that tree, and it will grow. And you got to add customer love, and you got to add great product and great service, and you really have to integrate yourself into whatever that community is. And restaurants are inherently kind of local area businesses, right? It's especially our kind of businesses. So wherever you end up, you need to figure out who your immediate customers are, and then the next kind of ring around that, and try to figure out how to win that set of hearts and minds, and then you kind of expand from there. Nowadays we use big data to kind of give us some insights around whether or not we think a location might be successful. But in the early days, it was, do these people look like the kind of people who are going to be excited when we open up? Is it busy enough? Is the visibility good enough? It's a number of factors. But I think the big learning, generally speaking, is you don't want to spread yourself too thin. You kind of want to grow kind of in rings. If you can move from the CBD of Sydney to the inner west, but you don't want to just go from Sydney to Newcastle because you're successful in Sydney, and then obviously Newcastle will work. It really is. It's a better strategy to kind of organically grow almost in sequence.
Like a tree in circles.
Yeah, like a tree in circles. I think it's a good analogy, and I think it proves valuable.
Yeah, it's very much looking at your locations as communities and not just another shop, or another shop window. It's going, okay, what role are we playing in that community?
We've heard that before from other entrepreneurs, that the importance of really embedding yourself into the community that you're operating in.
It's such a different model to, say, an online store. And I think the way the world's evolved over the last decade has kind of really changed that dynamic. You can open up a Shopify account and provide a service, and you can do online services. But there's still something in that bricks and mortar experience that, that renders all of those new technologies kind of ineffective. It really comes back to community, to locals. And, we sell 250 burritos a day. So you need to have, think about it, people might come in once a month. So there really has to be, you have to win over 20,000 customers to be successful. It's not like 3 people in one sale. It has to have a mass market appeal, and you have to win a lot of hearts and minds, which is important.
And I know you just kind of mentioned online, and to take that a little bit further, but because of COVID, we have seen this massive explosion in the home delivery service. So how did that change the way Mad Mex actually operated as a business?
It was beginning, and there was, we had a couple of Deliveroo in the market before COVID, but it was obviously just a massive, it was a life raft, really. For a lot of businesses, we went from, say, 10 or 15% of our sales mix would be delivery to 65% for big chunks of periods of time. And now it's kind of settled down closer to, say, 20%, so double where it was before COVID. everything new comes with a cost. It comes with a service cost. The cost for delivery is outrageous. And then there's all kinds of costs in the back end. We've got to reconcile all these new data sources, and the accounting cost is a hidden cost, and then training people how to deliver that service, because we've spent 10 years make sure we smile and thank the customer and engage with people and look after people, and all of a sudden we're looking after a product that goes into a paper bag, and then we lose control of it. So how do we control that experience as it relates to that product going into the bag, and then how it gets delivered to the customer? All just interesting opportunities to figure out how to crack that small but important kind of piece of the puzzle. And I think entrepreneurship generally is about identifying the problem, figuring out what the puzzle is, trying to figure out the best way to solve the puzzle, trying it, and then realizing you're probably not going to get it 100% right, and then trying to go back and fix that puzzle again or do it slightly better, and then trying to get to a point where that piece is solved to the point where you can go on and focus on the next big puzzle. And there's always something around the corner that's going to demand your attention.
Well, Clovis, you've raised some really good points about how, it is, over especially the past couple of years, it has been kind of a whole bunch of new puzzles to crack for anybody who runs their business, no matter how big or small. Figuring out how to make money out of something when maybe you're not getting as much foot traffic and everyone's at home. And there's all sorts of things that are coming up. But I just want to dig a little bit into that whole thing about the whole area of customer experience. We've had this explosion in takeaway and delivery, this demand for I want it now. And then you've also got the eat-in customer experience, the dine-in experience. It's something a lot of food businesses would have to juggle. What would your advice be about making sure that you're not kind of dropping standards on either front?
Yeah, I think the in-restaurant or that kind of face-to-face customer has to be your priority at any given second, right? If my food arrives 5 minutes late and I'm watching TV, I'm not nearly as stressed out as if I'm standing there watching people ignore me or whatever the kind of that experience would be like. So, really, when you have the opportunity to engage with another human being face-to-face, every one of those interactions is a really important opportunity and something that has to be the priority. And then I think being realistic, if the models change or if you need to add another resource, another person to make sure you can execute those two things, then don't treat them as one thing. Say, well, we need to execute two things well. What does it take to do two things well? It might mean that we need to change the roster or the structure, the people, or the way we configure something. Let's figure out how to get that piece right. Let's make sure we don't sacrifice the other, in this instance, the in-restaurant experience. But dividing them up and saying these are two separate challenges. We're not going to try to figure out how to combine them and get a 60 or 70 or 80% good on both. Let's make sure we get 100 on the first one and separate that thought out and get a 95 on the second one, if that's the secondary priority. But not to confuse those two kind of challenges.
I imagine one of the other challenges that would have come up during COVID, and not just because of COVID, but also the bushfires, the floods. Product, you deal in fresh ingredients, so sourcing fresh ingredients at times must have been a challenge. And what kind of logistics issues have you faced, and how have you kind of looked to solve them?
When COVID first hit, understandably, everyone, including myself, was kind of terrified, right? What does this mean? What's going to happen? Will we keep our jobs? All these things, right? And we had kind of an all-hands meeting, and I said something to the effect of, this is scary, yes, but it's also probably the most interesting, the most fun, the most challenging, the best opportunity for us as people who are running this business, and that's a team of 30 people. This is our opportunity. This is our test. This is our chance to prove that we're everything we think we can be as business leaders or managers or entrepreneurs. So yes, it's scary, but let's think about it from this perspective. It's not boring. The worst thing in life is to be bored. So this is not boring. It's a great opportunity. Let's go out and figure out how to make things happen. And everyone's got permission to do stuff faster, quicker, and riskier than we've ever done it before. So if you used to have a 6-week project to get approval for a marketing campaign, you now have delegation of authority. You can do that in 24 hours. Make sure you show one other person. So we went to a real kind of scramble approach. And it was just magic watching the team and people kind of they understood what we needed as a brand. They understood kind of what we were trying to achieve. And then that kind of dispersed autonomy meant that we got stuff done in a fraction of the time that would have normally taken us in our kind of, business as usual model. International shipping has been the hardest piece in terms, because we don't have many levers to press. If the container gets on a ship and then the ship decides to go to South Africa, it's really hard to figure out how to replace that container. So I feel a huge amount of appreciation, also kind of sympathy for our supply chain teams. And we've got great partners, and that's the other piece. Everyone kind of had to step up. Our supply chain partners for fresh produce have done just an amazing job, and they were flying or visiting farms and making sure that we had what we needed on their own initiative, but really proactive in terms of make sure we kept the machine going.
I think a lot of leaders had to communicate this sort of sense of calm, and we've got this under control during that period of time. Does that come naturally to you? Being a kind of that solid leader, or is it something that you kind of need, that you draw inspiration from others from?
I probably have this kind of a slightly higher risk tolerance. I probably get more energized by the fear than paralyzed by the fear. And I also spent a couple of years on Wall Street, and part of what you do as an equity trader is you're managing risk and you're trying to control your emotions and making good, thoughtful decisions, even though, some position might be going against you. So I probably had more practice managing risk and emotions than maybe some other people, but I found it invigorating until it became exhausting. There were periods of time when you kind of said, man, how much longer can this go on? You can't keep working at this level or this pace. And the same goes for the team. And I think the other factor that we have to deal with as a franchise business is we kind of understand our house, and that we've kind of got our pieces in place, and we've kind of made provisions to deal with whatever the circumstances might be. And then you got 40 franchisees who have all kinds of different circumstances that, they've got their business. So the thing I'm probably most proud of about how the team kind of rallied is we just delivered, I think, an exceptional world-class level of service to our franchise network. We provided them more information. We provided more calls, more feedback. How do you get on JobKeeper? How do you get on JobSaver? How are we going to support you with the landlords? And we stepped up and just tried to take as much of the pressure off them, or at least give them the tools they needed. Because just because I can handle a certain amount of stress, or the team's in a certain place, you have to consider that it's quite a number of people in the organization that have their own circumstances. And just because I feel okay doesn't mean that the business is in a good place.
Yeah, I imagine you'd have quite a high tolerance to burnout from your days on Wall Street, but how do you deal with burnout now?
When I'm doing it well, I'm exercising and I'm going out mountain biking or riding a dirt bike. That's probably my favorite way to burn off steam, is to get out in the woods and rip around on a dirt bike. And if I do it badly, I succumb to the temptation of having 2 glasses of wine and watching TV and
eating some Mexican.
Kind of got a negative cycle.
And you've got your dog Baxter. Or dogs are great for preventing burnout.
Yeah. We got very fortunate. We bought the dog 3 months before COVID. So not only do we had the great resource, but we paid a fair price.
They're worth every cent. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Now, look, we don't have much more time with you, unfortunately, but just before we wrap up, look, I just want to dig into how, one of Mad Max's calling cards is that you don't have secret recipes. Recipes and ingredients are all online. You innovated with this online nutrition calculator so people can see exactly what they're putting in their systems. Why is that level of transparency so important to you in how you do business?
Yeah, I think, maybe it was growing up with hippie parents who were poets and kind of valued the creative art more than the economic outcome. But I guess I've always come to Mad Max business as, my great artistic work, if you will. And in the things that I consider valuable, I think it's important that people get good, healthy food that they can trust. And when I look around the marketplace, I don't always see that that's the case. And one of my motivations for Mad Max was kind of to try to provide an alternative to what might be the unhealthy options that are ubiquitous. So somewhere in that combination of belief that, honesty, transparency, how we deal with each other honestly and transparently is important. What you put in your system should be clear and honest to you. And then how do we make it easy for you to have healthy choices that taste great? no one wants to eat a spinach salad every day. So, how do we do, well, some people do, but, how do we combine those values into something that every single day when we hand somebody the product, we feel good and proud, and also confident that they're better off for having made the choice to come to us as opposed to somewhere else.
So great. I love your business model. Anyway, we've just about run out of time, I'm afraid, Clovis. So I'd just like to say thank you again so much for joining us.
Listen, thank you guys. It's super fun. Love the opportunity. Love the show. I love what you guys are doing. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today.
You can find out more about Mad Mex at madmex.com.au, not to be confused with Mad Max, the movie.
Good movie.
Yes.
But I would say you'd have Mad Mex is where you're going to get your
tasty,
your delicious taste. You can watch Mad Max while
eating your Mad Mex.
You could.
Good. Thank you again for listening, and join us again in 2 weeks for another fantastic first act conversation.